Welcome back, everyone. I am so excited to dive into this explainer with you today because we're looking at what might literally be the ultimate historical irony. We're going to walk through how an untouchable tyrant, a man who possessed absolute, unquestioned authority, meticulously, almost systematically, engineered his own destruction. We are dissecting the anatomy of a downfall, focusing really heavily on the enduring legacy left behind by this monumental collapse of arrogance.
And to really understand this guy, just wrap your head around this number. 12,000. This isn't just some abstract statistic. According to the source material, this represents the horrifying lengths this ruler went to in a single year. Driven by absolute, gripping paranoia, he ordered the slaughter of 12,000 newborn infants. Why? Simply to stop a prophecy. He was so terrified of losing his grip on power that he was willing to shed rivers of innocent blood just to maintain it.
All right, let's start with Section 1, the illusion of absolute power. The arrogance of a king who thought he was a god.
You know, we always hear the name Firaun, right? Or Pharaoh. But actually, that wasn't even his personal name. It was this grand institutional title, kind of like emperor or tsar, given to the supreme kings of ancient Egypt. Historically speaking, there were about 18 or 19 pharaohs. So we're dealing with a massive, deeply entrenched institution of power here. But the texts describe the specific Firaun of this era as uniquely arrogant. The man was completely intoxicated by his own might.
And here is a wild detail from the historical texts. 100. According to these accounts, this specific Firaun went a staggering 100 years without ever falling ill. I mean, he didn't even catch a common cold or a fever for an entire century. Think about that. When a human being experiences absolutely no physical weakness, no pain, and faces zero resistance, well, their ego can inflate to incredibly dangerous levels. This unbroken streak of physical perfection completely fueled his delusion of immortality. And honestly, that delusion leads directly to this staggering quote. Because he felt utterly untouchable, he didn't just demand obedience anymore. He literally demanded worship. He proclaimed to his people, "I am your supreme Lord." He completely stopped treating them as subjects and started forcing them to bow to him as a literal deity. And this supreme arrogance, it's exactly what sets the stage for his dramatic and inevitable downfall, cementing a legacy of pure hubris.
Which brings us to Section 2, raising his own downfall. How paranoia invited the enemy inside.
So the narrative tells us it all started with a terrifying dream where Firaun saw a falling star burn his palace straight to the ground. His astrologers warned him, saying a boy from the oppressed Israelites, the Bani Israel, was going to rise up and destroy his kingdom, hence the tragic slaughter of those 12,000 infants we talked about. But the source material outlines this brilliant, almost poetic irony. When the prophesied child, known by the honorific Hazrat Musa, or Moses, was born, traditions state his mother was divinely guided to place him in a wooden box on the river to hide him. And where does this box float? Right into Firaun's private garden. Firaun's own wife finds the baby and actually convinces the tyrant to adopt him. When the baby refuses to nurse from any of the royal wet nurses, they end up hiring a woman from the town whose milk he accepts. It's like a cosmic joke. Pharaoh ends up literally paying Musa's actual birth mother to raise him right there inside the royal palace. Despite killing thousands to stop this prophecy, Firaun personally funds and shelters the very architect of his own downfall.
But as the accounts state, it definitely wasn't always smooth sailing. There was this highly tense incident when Musa was just a 2-year-old toddler. He was playing in Firaun's lap and suddenly slapped the tyrant's face so hard it shook him. Firaun's paranoia instantly flared, like, was this the boy? To test if the child was a genuine threat with conscious intent, Firaun offered him a choice: a plate of beautiful white flowers or a plate of hot burning coals. If he chose the flowers, it meant he was smart and therefore a threat. As Musa reached out, the narrative describes that divine intervention actually guided his hand to the hot coal, which he put right in his mouth, burning his tongue. And that convinced Firaun the boy was totally harmless and lacked understanding. It completely saved Musa's life, though it did leave him with a lifelong speech impediment.
Moving on to Section 3, Exile and Divine Preparation. From a prince in the palace to a fugitive in the desert.
The texts lay out a very distinct timeline of his exile here. One day, an adult Musa saw an Egyptian guard severely oppressing a man from the Bani Israel. Musa stepped in to stop the fight, throwing a single punch. But the traditions note that, with his immense strength, that one punch accidentally killed the guard. Now a wanted man, Musa fled Egypt in absolute fear. Days later, he arrives at a well in Midian, which is a region way outside of Egypt. There, he helps two shy women by single-handedly moving a massive crowd to water their flocks. Well, it turns out these women were the daughters of Prophet Shu'aib. Recognizing Musa's incredibly noble character, Prophet Shu'aib offers one of his daughters in marriage. But the dowry? Musa has to manage his flocks for 8 to 10 years. Musa ends up fulfilling a full 10 years of humble service in the desert. It's described as this profound period of preparation, before packing up his family to finally return to Egypt.
And that sets up Section 4, the Battle of Miracles, the ultimate showdown of power.
As Musa travels back, the texts state that God directly commands him to confront Firaun. It is time to demand that this tyrant stop oppressing the people. And you really have to notice the stark contrast in resources here. On one hand, Firaun relies entirely on massive worldly forces, vast armies, weapons, wealth, and literally the greatest sorcerers in the land. On the other hand, what does Musa have? He is armed with nothing more than a simple wooden staff and his own hand. But as the narrative tells us, these were no ordinary items. They were instruments of miracles. When thrown down, the staff became a terrifying, massive snake. And when Musa pulled his hand from his pocket, it is said to have shone with a blinding light, brighter than the sun.
So when Musa actually presented his message, Firaun predictably scoffed. "You grew up in my house. I am the supreme lord," he mocked him. He demanded a public duel just to humiliate Musa, summoning the absolute most elite sorcerers in all of Egypt. The traditions detail how the sorcerers went first. They threw down their ropes and, using dark magic, created this terrifying illusion of thousands of small, slithering snakes completely filling the arena. The crowd is absolutely terrified, right? But then, Musa was commanded to throw his wooden staff. The text states it didn't become an illusion. It became a massive, real, horrifying serpent that swept right through the arena, instantly swallowing every single one of the sorcerer's magical ropes. In the narrative, Firaun's intricate, worldly illusions were completely and utterly devoured by a higher truth.
The aftermath of that duel is staggering. I mean, the expert sorcerers immediately recognized this wasn't mere magic. The accounts state they literally fell to the ground, declaring, "We believe in the Lord of Harun and Musa." This dramatic shift in power completely humiliated and infuriated Firaun. His paranoia just spiraled into absolute blind rage. The text described that he became so ruthless that when he discovered his own wife, Hazrat Al-Sia, the very woman who had saved Musa as a baby, actually believed in Musa's God, Firaun mercilessly tortured her, pinning her down and dropping her from a great height to her death.
Which brings us to the climax in Section 5, a legacy of defeat. The sea reclaims the arrogant.
Following all these events, the narrative tells us Musa gathers the believers and leads them out of Egypt in the dead of night. And I really want you to think about this for a second. With all his wealth, his 100 unbroken years of perfect health, his massive armies, and all his cruelty, how does a king actually defeat a prophecy? Well, spoiler alert, he doesn't.
The texts describe Musa and his followers reaching the edge of the sea, totally trapped, with Firaun's massive army charging right behind them. It looks like game over. But the narrative states Musa was commanded to strike the water with his staff, and miraculously the sea split, carving out exactly 12 dry, distinct paths for the different tribes of the Bani Israel to safely cross.
Blinded by his own ego, Firaun arrogantly commands his army to charge right into those towering walls of water. He seriously thought his earthly authority could conquer this divine phenomenon. But the very moment the believers were safe on the other side, the accounts state the sea was commanded to collapse. And here is the ultimate poetic justice of it all. The man who claimed to be the supreme God, the man who relied on massive armies and heavy weaponry, was utterly defeated and crushed by water. Literally one of the simplest, most fluid, and lightest elements on Earth.
But here's the thing. The legacy of his downfall doesn't just end at the bottom of the sea. The source material notes that years later, the sea actually spat his lifeless body out onto the shore. It was preserved as a permanent historical warning, a literal monument to the fact that absolute arrogance, no matter how powerful it appears in the moment, always engineers its own destruction.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought to consider today. We've just seen how Firaun's illusion of invincibility completely blinded him to the reality that his power was incredibly fragile. Looking around our world right now, what structures of absolute power today are similarly blind to their own fragility? It really makes you wonder if history is just waiting to repeat itself, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep questioning the structures around you.